After 17 winters, retired Navy SEAL Elias Rourke had made peace with silence. Then his aging German Shepherd uncovered a red backpack beneath the Montana snow. It belonged to the woman Elias had loved and believed was dead. Inside was a warning about a veteran whose voice others had already dismissed. 3 radio pulses led Elias toward a truth buried deeper than the storm. This time, rescue would mean listening before deciding who needed to be saved. Tell us where you're listening from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. The morning after the storm, Bitterroot Valley shone with the severe beauty of a cathedral built from snow and sunlight. Ice clung to the tall pines in silver layers. The distant slopes reflected a pale blue glow, and thin columns of smoke rose from scattered cabins, drifting upward as slowly as prayers no one had found the courage to speak. Nothing moved along the forest road. Even the ravens seemed unwilling to disturb the silence. Inside a log cabin nearly 10 miles from town, Elias Rourke was losing an argument with his coffee maker. "I filled the reservoir," he told it. The machine answered with a resentful cough, shuddered once, and released half a spoonful of coffee onto the counter. Elias stared at the brown puddle. "That," he said, "is insubordination." Near the wood stove, Morrow lifted his graying muzzle from his paws. The old German Shepherd regarded Elias with deep amber eyes, one ear standing straight while the tip of the other leaned slightly outward. He had the solemn expression of a retired commander watching a former subordinate embarrass himself in civilian life. Elias pointed at the machine. "You saw what it did." Morrow yawned. At 58, Elias was tall enough to make the cabin's low door frames seem poorly planned. His shoulders were still broad beneath a faded gray Henley, though time had taken some of the hard military precision from his movements. He no longer moved as though every room might conceal a threat. These days, he moved like a man who knew exactly where the floorboards creaked and had no reason to hurry past them. His face was square, weathered, and made more severe by a neatly trimmed gray beard. Salt and pepper hair lay short across his head, brushed naturally to the left rather than clipped close in the manner of his service years. A thin scar crossed his left eyebrow, pale enough to disappear unless the light struck it. People in town called him quiet. Elias preferred organized silence. His life had narrowed into rituals that asked little of him and offered no surprises in return. He fed the stove before sunrise. He checked the weather radio. He split wood in measured rows and walked the Eastern Service Road after every heavy snowfall. He repaired his own roof, sharpened his own tools, and avoided conversations that contained the phrase, "You should get out more." The cabin did not question why he lived alone. The forest did not ask whether he was lonely. Only the coffee maker challenged his authority, and so far it had an impressive record. Elias wiped the counter and turned toward the mantel. He had not meant to look at the photograph there. He had become skilled at living around it without appearing to notice. June Halstead stood in front of a mountain rescue helicopter, one gloved hand shielding her eyes from the sun. Her reddish-brown hair had escaped its braid, and she was laughing at something beyond the camera. The photograph had been taken 17 years earlier, 3 weeks before the avalanche that erased her from the world. No body had been recovered. For the first year, Elias had treated that fact like a promise. By the 5th, it had become cruelty. Eventually, he had learned to call her dead, because the living needed words sturdy enough to build their days upon. Missing was not a foundation. Missing was a door left open through every winter. Morrow rose stiffly beside the stove, interrupting the direction of Elias's thoughts. The dog stretched one hind leg, then the other, his hips slow in the cold. "All right," Elias said. "You win. Patrol before breakfast. Morrow's tail moved once. Elias knelt to fasten the old dog's dark green thermal coat. He checked each black paw protector, pressed gently along the joints, and slipped the veterinarian's anti-inflammatory tablets into a small pouch attached to Morrow's brown harness. The dog tolerated this with dignity until Elias adjusted the right boot twice. Morrow withdrew his paw and gave him a wounded look. "You complained last time." The dog looked away. "Fine." Freeze artistically. By the time they stepped outside, the sun had climbed above the eastern ridge. Elias wore his navy winter coat over a dark green wool sweater, charcoal snow pants, and a gray knit cap pulled low over his ears. A leather radio strap crossed his chest, polished smooth by years of use. The cold met him sharply but cleanly. Snow squeaked beneath his boots. Morrow moved ahead at an easy pace, nose low, leaving a line of prints beside Elias's deeper tracks. They followed the old Forest Service road north, where drifts had gathered against the trees like white dunes. Elias carried a folding saw and marked 2 fallen branches that would need clearing later. He checked a drainage ditch, inspected the edge of a slope for cracking, and paused twice to let Morrow rest. There had been a time when Elias believed stopping meant losing ground. Age, grief, and one stubborn dog had taught him otherwise. Almost 2 miles from the cabin, Morrow stopped. It was not the ordinary pause of an old animal catching his breath. His entire posture changed. The dog's head lifted, his ears turned toward a stand of fir trees east of the road, and his weight shifted forward. Elias followed his gaze. Nothing moved among the trunks. Morrow. The dog glanced back once, then stepped off the road. Elias waited for him to reconsider. Morrow did not. That was not permission. The dog continued into the trees. Elias followed, less because he expected danger than because Morrow had never wasted effort on curiosity. The German Shepherd moved carefully through knee-deep snow, pausing every few yards to test the air. His pace was steady but urgent, his dark saddle coat standing out against the white ground. 20 yards into the forest, Elias saw a narrow strip of red tied around a pine branch. Most of it had been buried beneath fresh snow. What remained visible was made of reflective rescue tape, faded but deliberately placed. Elias's hand went instinctively to the radio on his chest. Below the branch stood an old Forest Service emergency cache, a waist-high metal box once used to store blankets and signal flares. A broken limb had struck the lid during the storm, forcing one corner open. Snow had spilled inside and covered whatever had been stored there. Morrow lowered his head, circled the box, and began digging. His movements were not fast. His age no longer allowed that, but each stroke of his front paws was determined, pushing snow away in heavy clumps. Elias crouched beside him. "Easy." Morrow ignored him. Elias cleared the bent lid and reached into the cache. His glove brushed canvas. A patch of deep red appeared beneath the snow. For 1 second, the forest seemed to lose all sound. Elias pulled the object free. It was a backpack, red canvas, reinforced seams, a broken buckle on the left side. Then he saw the white stitches on the shoulder strap. The thread crossed the fabric in uneven lines, too large in some places and nearly invisible in others. Elias knew every mistake in that repair because he had made them himself while sitting beside a rescue truck years ago. June had watched him sew and announced that his needlework qualified as an act of hostility against fabric. He had told her she was free to carry the pack with one strap. She had smiled and said, "I'd rather survive your craftsmanship." The memory came back whole, not softened by time, not blurred at the edges. Her voice, the mountain wind, the scrape of the needle against his glove, the way she had leaned against the truck, drinking terrible station coffee and laughing at him as though they had an endless supply of ordinary days. Elias remained on his knees, holding the backpack against the snow. Morrow stopped digging. The dog moved closer and pressed his shoulder against Elias's side. It was not enough weight to steady a man. It was enough to remind him that he still had a body. Elias inhaled slowly. The air hurt his lungs. "This isn't possible," he said. Morrow did not look at the pack. He watched Elias. That was the difference between them. Elias saw the past. Morrow saw the living man kneeling in front of him. The backpack was newer than it should have been. The canvas had faded, but the zippers had been oiled recently. Snow had not soaked through the inner lining. Someone had placed it in the cache before the storm, likely within the last few days. Elias carried it to the shelter of a wide fir and opened it carefully. There was no collection of sentimental objects waiting to wound him. The contents were practical. A folded topographic map sealed in plastic, 2 spare radio batteries, a compact VHF receiver, a bottle of heart medication prescribed to a man named Corbin Shaw, 2 packets of documents wrapped in waterproof sleeves, and a square of paper folded once through the center. Elias recognized the handwriting before he opened it. June's letters had always leaned slightly forward, as though even her words disliked standing still. He removed his gloves. The cold bit immediately into his fingers, but he needed to touch the paper without anything between them. Only one sentence had been written. Ezra Bell understands everything. Do not let them decide for him. Below the sentence were 3 dots arranged in a straight line. Elias stared at them. During mountain searches, when wind made speech impossible, he and June had used 3 taps against metal, wood, or radio casing. Not a distress call. Not a location. A promise. I am still here. He turned on the VHF receiver. Static filled the small speaker. Then the noise dropped away. A carrier signal pulsed once. Stopped. Pulsed again. Stopped. A third pulse followed. The static returned. Morrow lifted his head toward the northern ridge. Elias waited. Several minutes later, the sequence repeated. 3 signals, no voice, no breathing, only a deliberate transmission reaching through the mountains and the storm-damaged air. Elias took out his handheld radio. "Tessa, this is Rourke." The reply came after a burst of interference. "Go ahead." Deputy Sheriff Tessa Hale had spent enough years serving the scattered communities of Ravalli County to know that Elias rarely called unless a road was blocked, a roof had collapsed, or someone else needed help. Her voice was low and controlled, with none of the false urgency people used when they wanted to sound important. "I found an emergency cache east of Service Road 9, Elias said. "Coordinates incoming." He read them slowly, then gave her the names Ezra Bell and Corbin Shaw. Tessa repeated both. "What exactly did you find?" Elias looked down at the red backpack. Something that belonged to June. Silence settled over the radio. Tessa knew the name. Everyone who had lived in the valley 17 years ago knew it. When she answered, the humor had left her voice. "Elias, another system is moving in by late afternoon. Forecast says heavier wind, lower visibility. Go back to the cabin and wait for search and rescue." "I'm not going alone." "I did not ask whether you were going alone." "I'll meet Jonah Weller at the north staging point. I'll carry the satellite locator, file a route, and check in every 30 minutes. Another pause. Then Tessa said, "That may be the most responsible answer you have ever given me. I've had a difficult morning. I'm beginning to worry about you." Elias almost smiled. "Check the names." "I'm already doing it." Do not move beyond the staging point until Jonah arrives. Understood. Say it like you mean it. I understood the first time. That is not the same thing. The connection ended. Elias placed June's note inside the inner pocket of his navy coat, close to the old mechanical watch she had given him before the avalanche. He packed the documents and receiver back into the red bag, but kept the heart medication accessible. Morrow remained beside the emergency cache, nose lifted toward the northern trail. Elias looked once more at the uneven white stitches. For 17 years, he had trained himself not to imagine June cold, injured, waiting somewhere beyond the reach of searchlights. He had forbidden himself hope because hope had teeth. It could tear through a man long after grief had grown tired. But the backpack had not survived 17 years beneath the snow. Someone had placed it there recently. Someone who knew the road Elias walked after every storm. Someone who remembered the 3 signals. He stood, slung the red pack over one shoulder, and rested a gloved hand between Morrow's ears. The old dog leaned into his palm for only a moment before turning north again. Elias followed his gaze toward the bright, silent mountains. For the first time in 17 years, he allowed the impossible thought to form without crushing it. June Halstead might still be alive. Jonah Weller arrived at the northern staging point 12 minutes late and entirely unapologetic. The rescue vehicle came grinding through the snow on rubber tracks, compact and square-bodied, its orange warning light turning lazily beneath the white morning sky. Jonah stepped down before the engine had fully settled, carrying a gray rescue pack over one shoulder and a coil of rope across his chest. At 47, he was leaner than Elias, built for endurance rather than force. Dark blonde hair curled beneath an orange knit cap, and frost had already gathered in the short stubble along his jaw. His narrow face reddened quickly in the cold, giving him the permanent appearance of a man who had just finished arguing with the weather. He looked first at Elias, then at the red backpack. Finally, he looked at Morrow. "Which one of you found it?" "Morrow." Jonah nodded at the dog. "Of course. He's the qualified one." Elias handed him the map. Jonah unfolded it across the hood of the tracked vehicle, pinning one corner beneath his gloved hand. 3 locations had been circled in faded blue ink: an old service bridge, a weather station that had not reported data in nearly a decade, and a fire lookout on the northern slope. Jonah studied the markings. "This isn't a destination," he said. "I know. It's a route." "I know that too." Jonah looked up. "Good. I was worried retirement had made you pleasant and slow." "Only one of those things happened." Morrow climbed into the rear compartment with Elias's assistance. The old German shepherd turned twice on the padded floor before settling between the equipment cases. His amber eyes followed the 2 men with the patience of an animal who had long ago concluded that human pride was an incurable condition. Jonah checked the satellite locator clipped to Elias's coat, then the radio strap crossing his chest. "You carry the emergency beacon?" "Yes." "Avalanche transceiver?" "Yes." "Extra thermal blanket for the dog?" Elias opened the rear compartment and showed him 2. Jonah's expression softened by half a degree. "Your Navy record does not make you immune to weather," he said, "and your volunteer badge does not make you charming." "It's not a volunteer badge. It's a county credential." "That explains the authority, not the charm." Jonah closed the hatch. They left the staging point at 9:18. The tracked vehicle followed what remained of the Forest Service road, pushing through drifts that rose nearly to the headlights. Elias sat beside Jonah with June's map open across his knees. The red backpack rested at his feet, its white-stitched strap visible whenever the vehicle tilted. He did not touch it. The discovery had already unsettled one part of him. He refused to allow it to control the rest. Outside, the valley narrowed. Pine forest crowded close on both sides, and wind lifted powder from the branches in brief silver curtains. The bright calm of morning was beginning to change. Clouds gathered over the western ridge, not dark yet, but thick enough to erase the sharp line of the peaks. Jonah drove without speaking for several minutes. That was one reason Elias tolerated him. Jonah did not confuse companionship with noise. At the first marked location, they found an old metal post half buried beside the road. Once, it had carried a directional sign for rescue teams. Now only 2 rusted bolts remained. Jonah leaned out of the vehicle and examined the slope beyond it. "This route predates the satellite repeaters," he said, "back when storms knocked the valley off the map every winter." Elias traced the 3 circles with one finger. "The lookout would have had line of sight to the southern repeater. If the antenna still works. The signal in the backpack came from somewhere." Jonah glanced at him. "You think June left the route?" "I think someone did." It was the closest Elias had come to saying her name aloud since leaving the cache. Jonah did not press. The radio crackled at Elias's shoulder. "Rourke, this is Hale." Elias lifted the handset. "Go ahead." Tessa's voice came through in broken pieces, flattened by distance and interference. "I have preliminary information on both names." Jonah reduced speed. Elias looked out through the windshield, though there was nothing ahead but the road and white trees. "Start with Corbin." Corbin Shaw, 56, former military communications specialist. Later contracted as an investigator for an oversight non-profit reviewing veteran care providers. Elias had expected something old, an outdated address, an inactive license, a record ending years earlier. Instead, Tessa continued. Shaw maintained a residence outside Missoula until 6 days ago. Neighbor reported he left before dawn with 2 equipment cases. Has not returned. No missing person report filed. Elias's thumb tightened around the handset. The last time he had seen Corbin, 15 years earlier, they had been standing outside a veterans clinic in Boise. The argument had begun over June and ended with Corbin saying Elias only trusted people when they followed orders. Elias had replied that Corbin confused secrecy with wisdom. Neither man had apologized. "The prescription?" Elias asked. "Filled 12 days ago. Same medication and dosage as the bottle in the pack." So Corbin had handled the backpack recently. That did not answer how June's handwriting had reached it. It only widened the question. "And Ezra Bell?" A pause followed, filled with static. 78, former Army medic, resident at Lodge Haven for 6 years. Stroke 3 years ago. Diagnosis includes expressive aphasia and weakness on the left side. Jonah gave Elias a brief sideways look. Tessa continued. Current transfer summary states severe cognitive decline, inability to understand care decisions, and need for full financial supervision. That's not what the note says. No, it also isn't what his earlier neurological assessment says. The vehicle rolled over a buried rut and shifted hard to the left. Jonah corrected without taking his eyes off the road. Tessa's voice returned. The older evaluation says Bell understands spoken language, recognizes people and circumstances, and can make decisions when questions are simplified, and he is given enough time to respond. It specifically recommends a communication board and yes or no confirmation. What changed? I'm trying to find out. The recent assessment was completed through a contractor associated with Northline Continuity Services. The name meant nothing to Elias yet. Tessa explained that Northline managed residential care facilities across 3 states. Lodge Haven was not owned by the company, but Northline had been selected to receive its residents if the building was evacuated. "There are 11 people at Lodge Haven," she said. "County Emergency Management has a report claiming the backup heating system may fail, and part of the east roof may not hold under another heavy snowfall." "Is the report legitimate?" "The inspector exists. I haven't confirmed the conclusions." "And Belle is being transferred where?" "According to the list, a secured care facility near Billings." "Nearly 400 miles away." Elias looked again at June's handwriting in his memory. "Do not let them decide for him." Tessa lowered her voice. "It appears someone changed cannot answer quickly into does not understand the question." The sentence remained in the vehicle after the radio went quiet. Elias had spent years resenting the people who had decided he was better off believing June was dead. He had never known their names. He had never been given a room in which to object. Perhaps they had called it protection. Perhaps they had explained it in clean, careful language. Perhaps somewhere a form had reduced his entire future to a sentence someone else considered reasonable. Jonah kept both hands on the controls. "People like fast answers," he said. "Makes paperwork easier." Elias looked at him. Jonah shrugged. "My mother had Parkinson's. Toward the end, people asked me what she wanted while she was sitting beside me. Not because she couldn't answer, because waiting made them uncomfortable." It was the first personal thing Jonah had said all morning. Elias did not offer sympathy. Jonah had not asked for it. Instead, he said, "What did you do?" "I made them wait." The tracked vehicle reached the service bridge just before 11. A lodgepole pine had fallen across the approach, its crown tangled in the northern railing. The bridge itself was narrow, built from heavy timber over a frozen ravine. One section of railing had broken away, and wind had polished the planks beneath a thin layer of ice. Jonah stopped 20 yards back. "We leave the vehicle." Elias was already reaching for the rear hatch. Jonah climbed down and examined the bridge supports through binoculars before attaching a safety line to the nearest anchor post. He moved with the efficient caution of someone who did not believe bravery improved structural integrity. Morrow stepped into the snow, but hesitated when his hind legs reached the ground. Elias supported the harness handle until the dog found his balance. Jonah noticed but said nothing. They transferred the essential equipment into packs: rope, medical kit, batteries, thermal supplies, the heart medication, and the red backpack. Everything else remained with the vehicle. At the bridge, Jonah crossed first, testing each section with a pole. He secured a second line on the far side and signaled for Elias. Elias clipped Morrow's harness to the safety line. The dog placed one booted paw onto the bridge, then another. Wind moved through the ravine below, carrying loose snow along the frozen channel like pale smoke. Morrow kept his head low and his steps deliberate. Elias walked beside him, one hand on the harness, matching the dog's pace. Halfway across, Morrow stopped. His breathing had become heavier. Elias crouched immediately. "We rest." Jonah stood on the far side, watching the clouds build over the ridge. "We have weather coming." "I know. We've lost nearly 20 minutes." "I know that, too." Elias removed one glove and placed his hand against Morrow's chest. The heartbeat was fast, but regular. He checked the dog's paws, then offered a small amount of water. Morrow drank and leaned briefly against his knee. Jonah looked at Elias for a long moment. 10 years ago, he said, you would have pulled him forward. Elias kept his attention on the dog. 10 years ago, he would have pulled me. That isn't what I meant. I know. Morrow's breathing slowed. Elias waited another full minute before standing. There had been a period in his life when urgency had seemed like a moral virtue, The faster he moved, the more useful he felt. Delay had meant failure. Hesitation had meant weakness. But time did not always take things because a person moved too slowly. Sometimes it took them because he had moved too quickly to see what they needed. Morrow resumed walking. They crossed without incident. Beyond the bridge, the route climbed sharply through fir and spruce. Jonah took the lead, following old markers carved into trunks decades before. Elias walked behind Morrow, adjusting his own stride to the dog's shorter rhythm. Near the abandoned weather station, they found the first clear evidence that someone had used the trail recently. A boot print remained beneath the overhang of the equipment shed, protected from the storm. Beside it lay the torn corner of a silver medication wrapper. Elias compared the printed code to the bottle from the backpack. The numbers matched. Corbin had been there. The VHF receiver in Elias's pack emitted 3 carrier pulses. This time the signal was stronger. Jonah looked north through the trees. "We're close." They continued for another 40 minutes. The fire lookout appeared slowly through the snow, a dark wooden structure standing above the slope on thick supports. One of its windows had been covered from the inside. The antenna mast swayed in the wind, and a coaxial cable ran through a gap beneath the door. No smoke rose from the metal chimney. Elias stopped at the base of the steps. The place looked abandoned. Morrow did not bark. He lifted his nose, tested the air, and moved toward the door. Jonah reached for Elias's shoulder before he could climb. "Procedure." Elias waited. Jonah called out, identified the rescue team, and listened. For several seconds there was only wind. Then something struck the floor inside. Once, a pause, then twice more, not a code this time, something falling from a weak hand. Elias climbed the steps. Jonah followed with the medical pack open. The door resisted before giving way against a drift of snow. Cold air filled the room. A battery-powered radio sat on a table surrounded by cables, notebooks, and empty water containers. A man was seated on the floor beneath the window, his back against the wall. Corbin Shaw had once carried himself with the restless elegance of someone who always knew more than he intended to say. Now he looked diminished inside an old copper-brown parka. His steel-gray hair had grown long enough to fall across his forehead, and thin metal-framed glasses rested crookedly on his narrow nose. One hand remained near the transmitter, the other pressed against his chest. His face was pale, but his light brown eyes still held the familiar spark of badly timed humor. He looked past Jonah and settled on Elias. "You got older than I expected." Elias lowered the red backpack onto the floor. "You look remarkably poor for a man criticizing appearances." Corbin attempted a smile. No one moved to embrace. 15 years of silence stood between them, crowded with accusation, pride, and questions neither man could ask while Corbin was struggling to breathe. Morrow passed Elias and approached the man against the wall. The dog sniffed Corbin's hand, then sat close enough for his shoulder to touch Corbin's knee. Corbin looked down at him. "Still choosing difficult people, I see." Morrow remained where he was. Elias removed the bottle of heart medication from his coat and knelt. Whatever anger had waited 15 years for this meeting would have to wait a little longer. Jonah did not allow Elias to hand Corbin the medication immediately. He knelt beside the older man, removed one glove, and pressed 2 fingers beneath Corbin's jaw. Then he checked the inside of his eyelids, listened to his breathing, and wrapped a compact blood pressure cuff around his arm. Corbin watched him with tired suspicion. "You always this cheerful with patients?" "I save warmth for people who follow medical instructions." "I was trapped in a fire lookout." "You were hiding in a fire lookout." "There's an important distinction." "Not to your heart." Jonah had trained as a wilderness emergency medical technician long before becoming captain of the volunteer rescue team. He moved calmly, asking short questions and refusing to be distracted by Corbin's attempts at humor. Corbin had no severe chest pain, but his pulse was irregular, his blood pressure lower than normal, and his lips were dry. He admitted he had eaten very little and missed 2 scheduled doses after the Lookout's backup battery failed. Jonah contacted the county medical dispatcher through the satellite unit. After confirming the prescription label, Corbin's medical history, and his current symptoms, he gave him the approved dose with measured water. "Small sips," Jonah said. Corbin drank too quickly. Jonah took the bottle away. "I said small. I've survived interrogations conducted with more compassion. You probably talked through those too." While Jonah monitored Corbin, Elias moved to the transmitter table. The Lookout smelled of cold timber, dust, and overheated wiring. A portable battery had been connected to the old repeater through cables that did not belong together, but had been persuaded to cooperate with electrical tape, solder, and what appeared to be a section cut from a lamp cord. Elias inspected the connections. "Did you build this?" Corbin leaned his head against the wall. "I prefer the term restored. You connected a field battery to a 40-year-old repeater with household wire. It transmitted. So does a burning building." The old exchange came too easily. For a moment, it was possible to imagine that only a few weeks had passed since they had last worked together. Then Elias saw Corbin's metal recorder on the floor, marked with a strip of red tape. Beside it were several printed emails, facility reports, and handwritten notes. The years returned all at once. He repaired the loose power lead and replaced the corroded fuse. The transmitter steadied, its indicator light changing from an uneven flicker to a solid green. Morrow remained beside Corbin. The dog's shoulder rested against the man's knee, though his eyes followed Elias across the room. Corbin looked down at him. "He doesn't trust me. He doesn't know you." Same result. Elias did not answer. Jonah spread a thermal blanket around Corbin and handed him a packet of electrolyte solution. "You have about 10 minutes before I ask you to lie down and stop talking." Corbin opened the packet with unsteady fingers. "Then we should use them efficiently." He pointed toward the waterproof files in the red backpack. "Northline has been moving people through affiliated care facilities for years, not illegally in the dramatic sense. No locked vans, no forged death certificates, nothing that looks impressive in a courtroom sketch." Elias sat on the edge of the transmitter table. "What do they do?" "Mostly, they make themselves necessary." Corbin explained that Northline Continuity Services operated residential facilities across Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Many were legitimate. Some employees cared deeply about the people under their supervision. The problem was not a single cruel institution hidden in the mountains. It was a business model built inside ordinary procedures. Residents were evaluated during short appointments. Their confusion, pain, fatigue, or speech difficulties were documented without context. Those notes were then used to justify higher levels of care, financial supervision, or transfers to facilities that billed more for specialized services. "Sometimes the person needs that care," Corbin said. "Sometimes the building really is unsafe. That's what makes it work. They don't invent every problem. They take a real weakness and stretch it until it becomes permission. Lodge Haven had genuine structural concerns. The east roof needed reinforcement. Its backup heating system had failed inspection once and had only been temporarily repaired. Dr. Celeste Pruitt, the retired geriatric physician who managed the residence, had been raising money for renovations for nearly 2 years. Northline offered assistance. First came an assessment team. Then came recommendations. Then came transfer agreements presented as temporary emergency measures. 4 residents, including Ezra Bell, were classified as unable to participate meaningfully in their own care decisions. Once transferred, they would be sent to separate facilities, some hundreds of miles apart. "Why separate them?" Elias asked. "Isolation makes administration easier. Fewer familiar people questioning medication changes. Fewer friends noticing that a man who supposedly understands nothing still beats everyone at cards." Corbin paused to catch his breath. Morrow lifted his head immediately. Jonah moved closer, but Corbin raised one hand. "I'm fine." "No," Jonah said. "You're speaking. Those are different conditions." Corbin waited until his breathing settled. June and Celeste compared the recent evaluations with the original medical records. Ezra's report was the clearest. His aphasia was rewritten as cognitive decline. 3 other residents had similar changes. June found it? She noticed Ezra stopped receiving his communication board during official appointments. Celeste found the records. "And you?" "I followed the billing." Corbin had spent 11 months tracing facility ownership, consulting fees, and repeated transfers between Northline affiliates. He had sent part of the evidence to Naomi Vance, an attorney who worked with a veterans' legal aid organization. The documents suggested financial conflicts and improper assessments, but documents could not replace the residents' own statements. "The legal problem," Corbin said, "is that the people who need to object have already been described as incapable of objecting." Jonah looked towards the window, where snow had begun to move sideways across the glass. "So they need independent evaluations." "And time," Corbin replied, "which the storm is taking away." Elias opened one of the files. A photograph of Ezra Bell was clipped to the first page. The man had a long face, close-cropped white hair, and a carefully groomed mustache. He sat in a wheelchair beside a younger veteran, his expression sharp with amusement. Under the photograph, a recent assessment described him as minimally responsive. Elias studied Ezra's eyes. There was nothing absent in them. "What exactly does June want from me?" Corbin did not answer at once. That delay told Elias the question had another answer beneath the obvious one. He closed the folder. "Why didn't she contact me herself?" The warmth left Corbin's expression. Jonah gathered the medical supplies and moved toward the opposite side of the room. It was not privacy. The lookout was too small for that. But it was the courtesy of pretending there might be walls where none existed. Corbin looked down at his thin hands. "After the avalanche, June was taken out through a federal operation. The people investigating the medical contract fraud believed witness identities had been compromised." "You told me this before." "No. I told you she was probably dead." The words landed without volume. For 4 years, June had lived under protected identification. During that time, direct contact with Elias would have created risk, not only for her, but for several veterans and staff members connected to the investigation. Elias understood operational silence. He had lived inside it. 4 years, he said. "Yes. And after that?" Corbin rubbed his thumb across the edge of the electrolyte packet. "After that, she could have called." The room seemed to contract around the sentence. Outside, snow brushed the walls like dry sand. The repeater hummed steadily under Elias's repaired connection. "She could have called," he repeated. "Yes." Elias stood very still. He had built 17 years of grief around the belief that June had been taken from him by a mountain. Avalanches did not choose. Snow did not apologize. A man could rage at weather, but eventually weather became too large and indifferent to hate. This was different. For 13 of those years, there had been a decision. Not one decision made once, perhaps, but a decision renewed every morning. Silence chosen again and again. Corbin continued carefully. At first, she said she would contact you when the case closed. Then she wanted to wait until you had rebuilt your life. After that, she said too much time had passed to appear without answers. So she waited for better answers. She kept finding people who needed help. Elias gave a humorless laugh. That was convenient. Yes. The agreement in Corbin's voice was more painful than an excuse would have been. She helped people, Corbin said, a great many of them, but she also used that work to avoid coming back. Both things can be true. And you encouraged her. I did. Why? Corbin met his eyes. Because I thought knowing would pull you into danger again. Then, later, I thought it would destroy whatever life you had managed to build. Elias looked around the cold lookout, at the improvised wires, at the old dog resting against Corbin's knee, at the red backpack that had crossed 17 years to reach him. What life did you imagine I built? Corbin's face tightened. I didn't know. That didn't stop you from deciding for me. No. Elias walked to the iced window. Their tracks on the slope were already disappearing beneath fresh snow. You didn't keep me safe, he said. You kept me from knowing what I had lost. Corbin lowered his head. Yes. There was no dramatic apology, no plea for understanding. Corbin's acceptance of the accusation left Elias with nowhere easy to place his anger. A cruel man could be hated cleanly. Corbin was not cruel. He was frightened, loyal, intelligent, and wrong. That was harder. Morrow rose and moved away from Corbin. For a moment, Elias thought the dog had sensed the tension and chosen him instead. But Morrow stopped halfway between the two men and lay down on the floor. Not beside either one. Between them. Jonah's radio broke the silence. Tessa's voice came through urgently. Weller, Rourke, updated weather advisory. Front accelerated. Heavy snow reaches Lodge Haven in approximately 90 minutes. Jonah checked his watch. What is emergency management doing? Ruth Calder is deploying 2 tracked units, an ambulance, and a heated transport bus. They intend to evacuate before the access road closes. Elias turned from the window. Where are the residents being taken? Temporary staging is listed as Hamilton Community Center. Northline representatives are expected to receive them there for later placement. Corbin tried to sit straighter. That is the opening they need. Jonah pressed one hand against Corbin's shoulder. You are not going anywhere on foot. I know. You said that like a man planning something stupid. I was in communications. We prefer remote stupidity. Tessa reported that a medical team was approaching the lookout from the Eastern Service route. They could reach Corbin in 40 minutes if conditions held. Elias looked at Jonah. You stay until they arrive. Jonah frowned. And you? The snowmobile is in the lower equipment shed. If it runs, I can reach Lodge Haven before Calder's convoy. You're not approaching that ridge without a filed route. I'll file it. Check-ins every 20 minutes. 30. 20. Elias glanced at Morrow. The dog was tired, but alert. The route to Lodge Haven was shorter and less technical than the climb they had just completed. Still, Elias would not decide for him simply because time was running out. He knelt and opened the dog's harness. Morrow could remain with Jonah and return with the medical team. Instead, the German shepherd stood, stretched his stiff hind legs, and walked to the red backpack. He placed one paw on its strap. Jonah exhaled through his nose. That is not a medically recognized consent process. It's clearer than some paperwork. Corbin watched Elias secure the bag. June does not need you to rescue her. Elias paused. She needs someone willing to stop Northline from deciding for Ezra, Corbin said, and someone willing to stop her from doing the same thing for kinder reasons. The words found their mark. June had spent years fighting people who took choices away from the vulnerable. Yet if fear had driven her to hold everyone inside Lodge Haven against their wishes, she had crossed the same line from the opposite direction. Protection could wear many faces. Some carried contracts, some carried blankets, some loved you. Elias clipped the satellite locator to his coat and checked the channel on his radio. He was not ready to forgive June. He was not even ready to see her. But Ezra Bell did not need Elias's forgiveness. He needed time to answer for himself. Elias lifted the red backpack. Behind him, Corbin said, "For what it's worth, I am sorry." Elias did not turn around. "For what part?" "All of it. That's too large to settle today." "I know." Elias opened the lookout door. Wind pushed cold air into the room, carrying the first hard grains of the incoming storm. Morrow stepped beside him. Before leaving, Elias looked back once. Corbin was pale beneath the thermal blanket, one hand resting near the transmitter. Jonah stood beside him, steady and practical, already preparing for the medical team's arrival. There were years between Elias and Corbin that no honest sentence could erase. But honesty had finally entered the room. For the moment, that would have to be enough. Jonah remained at the fire lookout with Corbin, waiting for the medical team approaching from the Eastern Service Road. Before Elias left, Jonah checked the route twice, entered the estimated travel time into the county log, and made him repeat the radio schedule aloud. "Every 20 minutes, Jonah said. "I remember." People who remember usually don't sound offended by reminders. "I'm offended by your personality." "That means your circulation is fine." The snowmobile stored beneath the lookout had not been used in months. Its fuel line was stiff, one runner was packed with ice, and the engine needed 3 attempts before it caught. Elias cleared the intake, tested the brake, and secured the red backpack behind the seat. Morrow stood beside the machine in his dark green coat, watching the preparations. The journey ahead was shorter than the climb to the lookout, but Elias still checked the dog's paws and hips before lifting him into the padded rear carrier. Morrow accepted the assistance without enthusiasm. "You're welcome," Elias said. The dog turned his face toward the trees. Elias suspected gratitude had never been part of his training. They descended the northern slope along an old maintenance trail. The snowmobile moved carefully rather than quickly, following orange markers left by forest crews decades earlier. Wind pushed loose snow across the path, erasing the tracks behind them almost as soon as they appeared. Every 20 minutes, Elias stopped and called in. Jonah answered the first time. Tessa answered the second. On the third check, the signal broke twice before returning. Tessa warned that the storm front had accelerated. Ruth Calder's evacuation convoy was less than an hour from Lodge Haven. Elias looked toward the narrowing valley ahead. He had imagined seeing June again in 100 different ways during the first years after she disappeared. In some versions, she was injured and waiting in a hospital. In others, she had lost her memory. Once, during a night when grief had become particularly inventive, he imagined her walking through the cabin door carrying groceries and complaining about the weather. Those fantasies had ended long ago. Now that the meeting was real, Elias discovered that imagination had prepared him for nothing. Lodge Haven appeared through the trees shortly after noon. The building sat low in a wide basin beneath the western ridge, surrounded by snow-covered aspens and a split-rail fence. Built from honey-colored pine, It resembled an oversized mountain lodge rather than a medical institution. Its steep roof carried a thick white burden, and warm light filled the windows. Reflective yellow ribbons had been tied along the fence and walkway. Some hung at shoulder height, while others were positioned lower for people using wheelchairs. They trembled in the wind, making a visible path between the residence and the equipment shed. The place was worn, but cared for. A section of gutter leaned away from the eastern wall. 2 windows had been sealed with temporary insulation film. Fresh lumber was stacked beneath a tarp near the porch, evidence of repairs begun and not yet completed. Lodge Haven was not abandoned. It was surviving. Elias parked beneath the covered entrance and helped Morrow down. The dog's hind legs trembled briefly when they touched the ground, then steadied. Before Elias could knock, the door opened. A woman with silver-white hair cut neatly at her chin stood in the entrance. Red-framed glasses gave warmth to a round, attentive face, and a plum-colored cardigan showed beneath her blue-gray medical jacket. "You must be Elias Rourke," she said. "Dr. Pruitt?" "Celeste will do. Titles make people expect better handwriting." Her eyes moved to Morrow and softened. "And this gentleman?" "Morrow." Celeste opened the door wider. "Morrow is the first sensible visitor we've had today." The interior smelled of cedar, medication, toast, and something sweet baking in the kitchen. A radio played an old country song quietly from a shelf near the dining room. Several residents sat around tables covered with puzzles, books, and half-finished cups of coffee. No one looked imprisoned. No one looked entirely safe, either. Cardboard boxes stood near the walls. Medication bags had been labeled and arranged by name. Staff members moved between rooms with the hurried politeness of people trying not to let fear become contagious. At the far end of the dining room, a woman stood beside a long table, checking a list against several plastic medication cases. Elias knew her before she turned. The knowledge did not arrive through reason. It entered him through posture, through the angle of her shoulders, through the way she held a silver pen between her first 2 fingers while reading. June Halstead had once been incapable of standing still while thinking. She would shift her weight, tilt her head, tap a pen against her thumb. 17 years had changed the surface of her. Her reddish-brown hair now carried broad strands of silver and was tied in a low braid over her right shoulder. Fine lines framed her brown-green eyes. Her face was leaner, and the left wrist visible beneath her brick-red vest carried a pale crescent-shaped scar Elias did not remember. But the small tilt of her head remained. The room seemed to draw farther away. June looked up. The pen stopped moving. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Elias had believed anger would arrive first. Instead, he felt the weight of all the ordinary years she had lived somewhere else. Birthdays, winters, bad meals, morning coffee. Thousands of days too small to appear in any official report. June placed the pen on the table. "You're still late," she said. Her voice had changed less than her face. Elias removed his gloves 1 finger at a time. 17 years, he said. "I may have set a personal record." A man near the window laughed unexpectedly. Someone else murmured that 17 years was poor response time even for the federal government. June smiled. It lasted only a second, but it was real. Then her eyes filled. She did not cross the room. Elias was grateful for that. An embrace would have asked both of them to pretend their bodies understood something their minds had not yet survived. Morrow walked forward instead. He stopped several feet from June, tested the air, and looked back at Elias. June crouched slowly. "He doesn't know me," she said. "No." "He knows the bag?" He knows it matters. Morrow approached and sniffed her open hand. June did not touch him until he leaned closer. Then she rested her palm against the side of his neck. The dog's eyes half closed. Elias felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness, not relief. Something less generous. Jealousy, perhaps, that Morrow could meet the woman without carrying 17 years into the room. Celeste quietly asked the residents to continue preparing and led Elias and June into a small office behind the kitchen. The room held 2 mismatched chairs, a metal filing cabinet, and a window overlooking the east wing. A portable heater hummed near the wall. June closed the door. Elias remained standing. "How long?" he asked. "Corbin told you?" 4 years protected, 13 years by choice. June did not flinch from the numbers. "Yes." No excuses arrived. That made the anger harder to release. Elias looked at the woman before him and tried to fit her into the place where memory had kept her. Memory refused. "You let them hold a service for you." "I learned about it afterward." "You let me believe the mountain took you." "For the first 4 years, I couldn't contact you." "And after?" June's fingers tightened around the silver pen she had carried into the room. "Afterward, I was afraid." "Of them?" "Of you." Elias laughed once, without humor. "That makes sense. I was dangerous. I owned a cabin and had strong opinions about coffee." "I was afraid of what I had done to you." "You hadn't done it yet." June looked down. That struck deeper than he intended. She sat in one of the chairs but did not ask Elias to join her. "The first year after protection ended, I told myself I needed to wait until the investigation closed completely. Then another veteran needed help contesting a guardianship. Then there was a woman in Idaho whose benefits had been redirected without her understanding the paperwork. One more person. Yes. One more winter. Yes. Until helping strangers became easier than calling me." June raised her eyes. "Yes." The simple admission silenced him. She had no defense prepared. No heroic version of herself to offer him. "I thought you might have rebuilt your life," she said. "You didn't check." "No. You decided knowing would harm me." "I did. You made the choice for me." June looked toward the closed office door. "Yes." That word had become the true language of the day. Corbin had spoken it. Now June did too. Elias finally sat, not because the conversation had softened, but because his legs had begun to feel unreliable. He told her about the memorial. There had been no body, only her rescue helmet, a photograph, and a row of folding chairs beneath a gray sky. People had praised her bravery. A pastor who had met her twice spoke about closure. Elias had wanted to stand and ask how anyone could close a door when no one knew what was on the other side. Instead, he had remained seated because everyone was watching him to learn how grief should behave. He told June about searching the avalanche field after the official teams stopped. About waking at night convinced he had heard 3 knocks against the cabin wall. About eventually turning his life into routines, because routines did not disappear without explanation. June listened without interrupting. Tears moved down her face, but she did not ask him to comfort her. When Elias finished, she said, "I saved people because it was the only part of myself I still knew how to respect." "That doesn't make what you did to me noble." "I know. I can't forgive you because you finally sent a backpack. I didn't expect you to." "Good." June wiped her cheek with the heel of one hand. "I also don't expect falling snow and an old song in the dining room to make this romantic." Despite himself, Elias glanced toward the wall, where the country singer had begun a mournful chorus about coming home. "The timing is aggressive," he said. June gave a broken laugh. It did not repair anything, but it kept the room from collapsing under the weight of what could not yet be repaired. A hard knocking sounded in the hallway. 3 strikes. A pause. 3 more. June stood immediately. "That's Ezra." They found him near the front corridor in a wheelchair, surrounded by 2 staff members and several packed bags. Ezra Bell was a tall black man, reduced somewhat by the chair, but not by age. His shoulders remained broad beneath a mustard-colored cardigan, and a neatly groomed white mustache framed a mouth struggling to form words. His dark eyes were alert and furious. One staff member held a clipboard. "Ezra, we need you to understand that the transfer is for your safety." The other spoke before he could respond. "You'll be taken somewhere equipped for your needs. Do you understand?" Ezra struck the armrest 3 times. Neither staff member stopped. "You'll have staff around the clock," the first continued. "There is no reason to be upset." Ezra hit the armrest again, harder. Morrow moved through the group. The German Shepherd sat directly in front of the wheelchair and placed one paw on Ezra's black shoe. The room became still. Ezra looked down. His hand relaxed. He tapped the armrest 3 times, slower now. Celeste arrived carrying a laminated communication board with large letters, simple phrases, and colored yes or no sections. 3 taps means wait, she said. He has used it since his stroke. The younger staff member looked embarrassed. "We were trying to explain." "You were waiting for your turn to speak," Celeste replied. "That is not the same thing." Elias knelt beside the wheelchair, keeping enough distance for Ezra to see both him and the board. "My name is Elias. I'm going to ask one question at a time. Take as long as you need." Ezra's eyes moved from Elias to Morrow. Then he tapped once. Celeste explained, "Agreement." Elias asked whether Ezra understood Lodge Haven might lose heat during the storm. Ezra pointed to yes. "Do you want to remain in this building if the heating system fails?" Ezra pointed to no. June shifted behind Elias. "Do you agree to leave Lodge Haven temporarily?" "Yes." "Do you agree to be transferred alone to the Northline facility near Billings?" Ezra's hand moved sharply to no. The answer came without hesitation. Elias waited before asking the next question. "Do you want to leave with the other residents?" Ezra tapped once, then pointed to yes. "Do you want an independent doctor and a lawyer to speak with you before anyone makes a long-term decision?" Ezra's hand trembled as it crossed the board. Yes. He then pointed to 3 letters, slowly and deliberately. S-A-M-E. Celeste leaned closer. "Same place?" Ezra tapped once. He wanted to leave the unsafe building. He wanted to remain with the people who had become his community. The 2 desires did not contradict each other. Only the plans made without him had treated them as though they did. June stood motionless beside the packed bags. "I thought keeping everyone here was the only way to stop Northline," she said. Ezra turned toward her. His expression softened, but he pointed to no, not cruelly, clearly. Elias rose. "You're still deciding for them." June looked at him. This time she did not answer immediately. Outside, wind drove snow against the windows. Lodge Haven's old heater rattled beneath the floor, struggling to hold warmth inside a building that could not survive on devotion alone. June looked from Elias to Ezra, then to the bags she had refused to let staff carry outside. For years, she had fought people who converted vulnerability into permission. Now fear had brought her to the same boundary. Northline called it administration. June had called it protection. Ezra, with one finger resting on the word no, called both by their true name. A choice taken away. The first vehicle reached Lodge Haven beneath a sky that had turned the color of old iron. A tracked rescue carrier came through the trees with its amber light flashing, followed by a second unit, an ambulance, and a short-heated bus moving carefully through the deepening snow. Behind them came 2 volunteer fire department trucks, carrying medical supplies, folding stretchers, oxygen tanks, and enough blankets to cover every chair in the building twice. Ruth Calder stepped down from the lead vehicle before anyone could meet her at the porch. She was 59, tall and solidly built, with a rectangular face weathered by years of outdoor emergencies. Brown remained in her short silver hair, though not enough to defeat the gray. She wore a mustard yellow command jacket over charcoal fleece, waterproof black cargo pants, and a large digital watch that seemed designed to accuse everyone else of wasting time. A radio rested on her left shoulder. An orange marker was clipped to her chest. She looked at Lodge Haven's roof before she looked at any person. "That east section is carrying more weight than the report estimated," she said. June came through the doorway without a coat. "The interior supports were reinforced last winter. Temporarily. They've held. So far." Ruth did not speak harshly. She simply had the manner of a woman who had watched the phrase "so far" become an obituary more than once. Tessa Hale followed her out of the second vehicle, dark hair braided neatly behind her sheriff's jacket. A small blue notebook was tucked beneath one arm, and snow had collected on the shoulders of her olive-brown coat. She looked first at Elias. "You missed a check-in by 4 minutes. The ridge blocked the signal. I assumed either that or you had discovered a new way to be difficult. Both remain possible." Her eyebrow lifted, but she said nothing more. The final person to step from the convoy was a thin man in a black overcoat, unsuited for the mountain. Wesley Stroud introduced himself as a regional placement administrator for Northline Continuity Services. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, with carefully parted brown hair, rimless glasses, and a leather portfolio held close beneath his arm. He did not resemble a villain. That made June trust him even less. Stroud entered Lodge Haven carrying a printed list of 11 names and 5 receiving facilities. The list had already decided where everyone would go. In the dining room, Ruth removed her gloves and spread a county evacuation map across the longest table. Wind pushed against the windows, making the glass hum in its frames. "My authority is limited," she told the room. "I can order evacuation if the building is unsafe during the storm. I cannot determine permanent residence, financial guardianship, or long-term care." Stroud placed his portfolio beside the map. "Northline has already arranged appropriate placement based on each resident's assessed needs." June took the list from him. Ezra Bell would be transported to a secured care facility near Billings. 2 other residents would go north to Great Falls. 4 would be divided between facilities outside Missoula. The remaining names were assigned to smaller homes scattered across the state. No 2 close friends had been placed together. June put the paper down as if it had become contaminated. "They are not inventory." "No one suggested they were," Stroud replied. "You assigned them numbers, vehicles, and separate destinations without asking them. The evaluations indicate several residents cannot provide informed consent. Evaluations your company arranged. Evaluations conducted by licensed professionals." The exchange began gathering heat. Elias stood near Ezra's wheelchair, with Morrow beside him. He could see June's hands tightening around the edge of the table. 17 years earlier, that posture would have meant she was about to climb a cliff in bad weather, because someone had told her it was impossible. Now it meant she was prepared to fight an entire system, using nothing but anger and a silver pen. Ruth interrupted before either side could turn the room into a courtroom. "The heating system failed inspection. It passed after repairs," June said. "It received temporary approval. The backup generator has not been tested under this load, and the county engineer cannot guarantee the east roof through another 12 inches of snow." We can reduce the load. With what crew? We have volunteers. They cannot work on a roof in this wind. June looked toward Elias. She expected support. What she found was hesitation. You agree with her, she said. I agree that the building may not be safe tonight. The words struck June like betrayal. Northline wants us out. Northline did not create the storm. They are using it. That does not make the roof stronger. For a moment, only the wind spoke. Elias kept his voice low. If we keep everyone here to prove Northline is wrong, then we are using them too. June stepped back. That is not what I'm doing. You are protecting Lodge Haven. I am protecting the people inside it. Those are not always the same thing. Ezra watched them both. His right hand rested near the laminated communication board on his lap. Elias nodded toward him. The building is not the decision. He is. June followed his gaze. The anger in her face did not disappear. It changed shape. Tessa placed her phone on a stand at the end of the table. On the screen appeared Naomi Vance, joining from an office in Helena. Naomi wore a navy blazer over a burgundy turtleneck. Her natural curls were gathered into a low bun, and tortoise-shell glasses framed calm brown eyes. Behind her, shelves were packed with legal binders marked by purple tabs. Before we begin, Naomi said, I need everyone to understand what I can and cannot do. Stroud folded his hands. I assume Northline should have counsel present. You may contact counsel, Naomi replied, but no one here is being charged with anything. I am seeking a temporary order preserving the residents' current legal and financial status until independent assessments can be completed. She explained that Corbin's documents showed irregularities, conflicts of interest, and significant differences between earlier medical records and the recent Northline evaluations. That was enough to raise concern. It was not enough to prove the entire case. The court will want evidence that the residents can express preferences when provided appropriate support, Naomi said. Not that they all make the same choice, only that their choices are their own. Ruth looked at the clock. How long? To prepare the emergency filing? 20 minutes. The judge is standing by. We may not have 20. Then give me 10 and accurate answers. Tessa asked Ezra whether he consented to being recorded for the limited purpose of the emergency petition. Celeste placed the communication board within easy reach. Ezra pointed to yes. Morrow lowered himself beside the wheelchair and rested his head across Ezra's shoes. No one asked the dog to move. Elias knelt beside the board. Do you understand that Lodge Haven may lose heat during the storm? Ezra pointed to yes. Do you want to leave the building tonight? Again, yes. Do you agree to be taken to the secured facility near Billings? Ezra's finger moved firmly to no. Do you want to travel with the other residents to one temporary location? Yes. Do you want an independent medical evaluation before any permanent placement? Yes. Do you want a lawyer present before anyone changes who controls your finances? Ezra tapped the armrest once and pointed again. Yes. Naomi spoke from the screen. Mr. Bell, did Northline staff provide your communication board during your last assessment? Ezra pointed to no. Did you attempt to tell them you understood their questions? Yes. Were you given enough time to answer? Ezra's hand moved sharply. No. Each response took time. No one finished the movement for him. No one turned a pause into confusion. Stroud shifted near the wall. You're using simplified questions that may influence the answers. Naomi did not raise her voice. The earlier evaluation recommended simplified questions. Failing to follow that recommendation is precisely the concern. Ezra's mouth moved. A sound emerged, strained and incomplete. Everyone remained still. He tried again. Wait. The single word cost him visible effort. Celeste's eyes filled. Elias did not praise him. Praise would have turned communication into a performance. He simply waited. Ezra pointed toward the communication board and spelled one word. Listen. The room changed after that. Not dramatically. No one gasped. The storm did not pause against the windows, but the word remained on the board, like a bell that had been struck once and was still sounding. One by one, the other residents were invited to speak. Some used ordinary conversation. One woman wrote her answers because anxiety made her voice unreliable. Another man asked Celeste to repeat every question because his hearing aids distorted speech when too many people talked at once. 7 residents wanted to remain together at a temporary shelter until independent reviews were completed. 2 wanted to be transferred closer to adult siblings in different cities. One man, Walter Green, said he had no attachment to Lodge Haven and had been requesting a facility with better physical therapy for months. June looked at him in surprise. Walter shrugged. You make terrible oatmeal. A few people laughed. Celeste placed one hand over her heart. My oatmeal has character. It has structural integrity, Walter replied. You could patch the roof with it. Even Ruth smiled. The final resident, a quiet former mechanic named Dennis Rowe, was uncertain. He asked for more information before deciding anything beyond the emergency evacuation. Naomi recorded that too. There was no single collective wish. No perfect group standing together against a faceless institution. There were 11 adults with 11 histories, 11 fears, and more than one reasonable idea of safety. June moved away from the table and stood near the window. For months she had thought the moral line was simple. Lodge Haven on one side, North Line on the other. But Walter wanted better therapy. 2 residents wanted to live near family. Dennis wanted time. Ezra wanted community without confinement. Protecting their rights did not mean keeping them all beside her. It meant accepting that some might choose to leave. Elias joined her by the window. You were right about North Line, he said. June watched snow erase the driveway. That doesn't mean I was right about everything else. No. She gave him a tired look. You might consider occasionally softening the truth. I tried once. It developed complications. Despite herself, she smiled. At the table, Naomi finished preparing the petition. Tessa uploaded the residents' recorded statements through the county's secure connection. Celeste provided copies of the original neurological assessments. Ruth turned to the county map. I'm changing the emergency plan. All 11 residents go to Hamilton Community Center tonight. No one is released from county shelter into long-term placement until the court responds and independent support is arranged. Stroud stepped forward. You do not have authority to interfere with existing transfer agreements. I am not deciding permanent placement, Ruth said. I am moving vulnerable residents to a safe county shelter during a declared weather emergency. Northline has prepared specialized facilities. And Hamilton has heat, medical staff, accessible rooms, and space for all 11 people together. This creates liability. Ruth picked up her orange marker. So does driving elderly residents another 400 miles through a blizzard. Stroud's expression tightened. You are allowing emotion to disrupt an established process. Ruth drew a thick circle around Hamilton on the map. No, I am preventing your process from outrunning the law. At that moment, the lights flickered. Once, twice. The old country song on the radio slowed into a low, distorted groan. Then Lodge Haven went dark. For several seconds, the only illumination came from the gray daylight at the windows and Naomi's face glowing from Tessa's phone screen. Beneath the floor, the backup generator coughed to life. It ran unevenly, shuddering through the building like an exhausted animal. A red warning light began blinking on Celeste's medication refrigerator. Ruth looked at her watch. "How long can the generator hold?" Celeste listened to its unstable rhythm. "At full load? I don't know." The wind struck the eastern wall hard enough to rattle the dishes in the kitchen. Ruth folded the map. "Then the argument is over." Outside, volunteers switched on portable floodlights, and their beams cut through the snow like pale roads leading into the storm. No one in the dining room needed another explanation. The time for choosing had been protected. Now they had to move. The evacuation began beneath yellow work lamps strung along the porch and fence line of Lodge Haven. Snow crossed the yard almost sideways, erasing footprints within minutes. The reflective ribbons tied along the railings flashed whenever the wind twisted them toward the lights, turning the walkway into a narrow river of gold through the white. Inside, the building had lost most of its heat. The backup generator still ran, but its rhythm was uneven. Every few minutes, the lights dimmed, and the medication refrigerator released a warning beep from the kitchen. Ruth Calder stood in the center of the dining room with her radio at her shoulder and a waterproof evacuation board balanced against one arm. "No one leaves without a tag," she said. "No tag, no vehicle." Each resident received a laminated card attached to a bright cord. The cards listed names, medication schedules, mobility needs, emergency contacts, and preferred communication methods. A final line recorded the temporary destination each resident had agreed to: Hamilton Community Center. Not Billings, not Great Falls, not 5 separate facilities chosen by someone else. June and Celeste checked the medication bags twice. Tessa photographed each sealed packet before placing it inside a numbered transport case. 2 volunteer firefighters moved portable oxygen units toward the ambulance, while another crew secured wheelchairs inside the heated bus. Elias helped where he was needed and stayed away where he was not. That was new for him. During his military years, usefulness had often meant taking control before uncertainty could spread. At Lodge Haven, usefulness meant trusting Ruth with the vehicles, Celeste with the medicine, Tessa with the records, and June with people whose histories she knew better than he did. He was not the center of the operation. He was one working part among many. Jonah returned through the front door carrying snow on his shoulders and Corbin's old recorder in one gloved hand. "Medical team has him," Jonah said. "They're taking the eastern route to St. Patrick Hospital. He was complaining the stretcher straps lacked dignity." "That sounds stable." He also tried to correct the paramedics' radio procedure. "Then he may live forever." Jonah's expression became more serious. "The upper road is still open, but it's narrowing. We move now or we lose it." Ruth heard him and raised 2 fingers towards the drivers. 10 minutes. Across the room, Morrow moved between the residents. The old German shepherd did not hurry. His hips were stiff after the mountain crossing, and Elias had removed the paw protectors long enough to check for ice irritation. The dog's dark green coat was dusted with snow from the doorway. Morrow stopped beside Arthur Wynne, an 82-year-old former Air Force pilot standing near the bus steps. Arthur was tall, despite the bend in his spine, with thin white hair and a narrow face that seemed designed for skepticism. He had spent years flying medical transport aircraft, but since developing panic attacks after a stroke, enclosed vehicles made his breathing quicken. "I'm not getting on that thing," Arthur said. The bus driver waited without arguing. June moved closer. "Arthur, the road will close." I heard Calder the first 6 times. You need to leave. I know what I need. His voice remained firm, but his hand had begun shaking around the handle of his cane. Morrow walked onto the first bus step and lay down across it. Arthur looked at him. You're blocking traffic. Morrow rested his chin on his paws. Arthur frowned. That animal has no respect for aviation personnel. Elias stood several feet away. He has strong opinions about pilots. Arthur placed one hand on Morrow's back. The dog's breathing remained slow and regular beneath his palm. Count with him, Celeste said gently. Arthur did not answer, but his lips began moving. One breath, then another. By the 6th, the shaking in his hand had eased. Morrow stood, turned inside the bus, and looked back. Arthur followed him aboard. No one applauded. The driver simply closed the door after them, preserving the man's dignity by treating courage as ordinary. In the west bedroom, Margaret Sloane refused to leave her collection of photo albums. Margaret had worked as a Navy nurse for nearly 3 decades and still wore her silver hair in a practical twist at the back of her head. 12 albums covered the bed, each thick with photographs, letters, pressed flowers, and handwritten dates. I cannot abandon these, she said. June looked towards the window. Snow struck the glass in hard bursts. We can come back. That is what people say before buildings burn or roofs collapse. June did not promise that everything would be safe. She had made too many promises on behalf of the future already. Instead, she sat beside Margaret. Which 3 would you carry if you had to walk out yourself? Margaret stared at the albums. All of them. You can carry 3. The older woman's mouth tightened. Morrow entered the room and sat beside an empty storage box near the bed. Margaret looked at him. Is he judging me? He judges everyone, Elias said from the doorway. It keeps him young. Margaret examined the albums one by one. She chose the book containing photographs of her service years, another filled with images of her late wife, and a smaller album holding pictures of every patient who had written to her after recovery. June placed those 3 in the box. The others remained on the bed beneath a waterproof sheet. I will return for them when the road opens, June said. Margaret studied her face. You promise? No, June replied. I will make a plan and tell you the truth if the plan changes. Margaret nodded slowly. That will do. The answer affected June more than any gratitude could have. Outside, volunteers carried the box toward the bus. The final residents boarded as the wind strengthened. Ezra's wheelchair was secured near the front, where he could see both the driver and the aisle. His plaid navy and brown blanket covered his legs, and the communication board rested in a side pocket. Elias led Morrow toward Jonah's tracked vehicle. Morrow. The dog stopped beside the bus door. Elias pointed toward the lead vehicle. Up front. Morrow looked at him, then back at Ezra. Morrow, come. The command was clear. The dog did not move. Instead, he entered the bus and settled beside Ezra's wheelchair, lowering his head across the older man's knees. Ezra placed one hand between the dog's ears. There had been a time when Elias would have interpreted hesitation as disobedience. A team depended on commands being followed before circumstances changed. But Morrow was no longer a young working dog. And Elias was no longer asking for obedience in a battlefield where delay could cost lives. The dog had chosen where he was most useful. Elias closed the bus door. Jonah watched him from the lead vehicle. You going to discipline him later? I'm considering a strongly worded performance review. Those work well on dogs. They work poorly on coffee machines. The convoy left Lodge Haven at 7:14 in the evening. Jonah drove the first tracked carrier. Elias sat beside him with the county route map spread across his lap. Behind them came the ambulance, the heated bus, the second tracked unit, and the fire department vehicles. Ruth maintained radio contact from the rear command truck. June and Celeste remained on the bus with the residents. Tessa sat near the front with the medication cases and sealed legal files secured beneath her seat. The reflective ribbons disappeared behind them. For several miles, the road descended without obstruction. Snowplow markers rose from both sides like narrow red poles guiding them through the dark. The convoy moved slowly enough that the vehicles never lost sight of one another. Then Jonah stopped. A young pine had fallen across the road, its trunk caught between the snowbank and a cluster of rocks. It was too heavy for the volunteers to move by hand and positioned badly for the vehicles to drive around. No one tried. Jonah and the firefighters assessed the slope, attached a winch cable to the trunk, and cleared everyone from the pull zone. Ruth timed the delay, while June checked the temperature inside the bus. The work was careful, methodical, and frustratingly slow. That was what real emergencies often looked like. Not a heroic leap over danger. A group of tired people doing the correct thing while the clock continued moving. Inside the bus, Dennis Rowe sat near the rear door. The former mechanic had been uncertain about every long-term option presented to him, but he had agreed to Hamilton because it delayed decisions he was not ready to make. He had spoken little since boarding. Morrow suddenly lifted his head from Ezra's knees. The dog stood, moved down the aisle, and stopped beside Dennis. He pressed his nose against the man's hand and gave a low whine. Dennis did not respond. June looked up from Margaret's medication list. "Dennis!" His face had gone pale. A faint sheen of sweat covered his forehead despite the cold. Celeste reached him first and checked his pulse. "When did you last eat?" Dennis blinked slowly. He could not remember. His blood glucose reading was dangerously low, but still treatable. June opened the emergency nutrition kit, gave him glucose gel, then followed with crackers and juice once he could swallow safely. The bus remained quiet while they waited. Dennis's color gradually returned. He looked down at Morrow. "Dog found me before the nurse did." Margaret, seated across the aisle, adjusted her blanket. "Dogs don't have paperwork." Celeste gave her a pointed look. "Some of us were checking 11 medication charts." "I said what I said." A few residents laughed softly. The sound was not relief exactly. It was something more useful, the reminder that they were still people traveling together, not medical problems arranged in seats. Morrow returned to Ezra only after Dennis had eaten half the packet of crackers. The fallen pine was cleared 23 minutes later. The convoy moved again. By the time Hamilton appeared below them, the storm had erased the mountain behind the vehicles. The town lights glowed through the snow like blurred stars. Near midnight, they entered the parking lot of the community center. Local volunteers waited beneath the awning with wheelchairs, blankets, and thermoses of soup. The basketball court had been divided into sleeping areas using portable screens. A quiet room had been prepared for residents sensitive to noise, while 2 accessible restrooms had been stocked with medical supplies. No cameras waited. No company signs had been hung on the walls. Only handwritten name cards placed above 11 beds. Ruth stepped off the command vehicle and counted every resident as they entered. 11 out. 11 in. No one missing. Inside the community center, Naomi appeared again on Tessa's phone. Her voice was tired, but her smile reached her eyes. The judge signed the temporary order. Stroud, who had followed the convoy in a county vehicle, said nothing. Naomi continued. No resident may be transferred from Hamilton into long-term placement without an independent review, access to counsel, and communication support appropriate to that resident. The victory did not produce cheering. People were too tired. June closed her eyes briefly. Ruth sat down for the first time that night. Celeste checked the medication refrigerator and immediately began reorganizing its contents. Elias stood near the temporary beds, while Morrow slept beneath Ezra's chair. Tessa replayed a short section of Ezra's recorded statement to confirm the file had uploaded correctly. His answers came through the small speaker, slowly. Yes, he understood the danger. Yes, he wanted to leave Lodge Haven. No, he did not agree to permanent placement without independent review. At the end of the recording came 3 deliberate knocks against the wheelchair armrest. Elias looked toward June. 17 years earlier, 3 knocks had belonged to the two of them. A private promise sent through darkness. I am still here. Now the meaning no longer belonged to their lost love or unfinished past. It belonged to Ezra, to Dennis, to Arthur, Margaret, and every person whose silence had been mistaken for absence. The 3 knocks did not ask someone else to become a hero. They asked the world to stop speaking as if the person making them had already disappeared. The investigation into Northline did not end when the storm passed. There was no single morning when every guilty person was named, every contract canceled, and every wrong corrected before lunch. The work unfolded through hearings, medical reviews, interviews, and boxes of records carried into offices where the windows did not look out on mountains. Northline's transfer contracts in western Montana were suspended while state regulators examined the company's financial relationships with its affiliated facilities. Courts ordered assessment files and billing records preserved. Residents whose financial authority had been transferred to third parties received independent legal reviews. Some of the findings were clear. Several evaluations had been completed too quickly. Communication recommendations had been ignored. A number of residents had been labeled unable to participate in decisions after appointments lasting less than 20 minutes. Other findings were less simple. Some Northline employees had tried to do their jobs well inside a system that rewarded speed. Others admitted they had noticed problems but feared losing their health insurance or their positions. A few executives were investigated for financial interests connected to facilities receiving the transfers. Not everyone inside the company was cruel, but too many people had chosen convenience over the discomfort of waiting. Ezra Bell was evaluated by Dr. Samuel Greer, an independent geriatric neurologist with a patient face, a quiet voice, and a habit of setting his watch face down before beginning an appointment. He did not ask Ezra 10 questions in quick succession. He asked 1. Then he waited. Ezra used his communication board, gestures, written letters, and a speech assistance device. The assessment took nearly 3 hours across 2 sessions. Dr. Greer concluded that Ezra understood his medical condition, living arrangements, finances, and legal options. He required communication support, not someone to replace his decisions with easier ones. Several other Lodge Haven residents received similar findings. Walter Green transferred voluntarily to a rehabilitation center with a larger physical therapy department. 2 residents moved closer to their siblings. Dennis Rowe remained uncertain for weeks before choosing a supported apartment in Hamilton. Ezra stayed with a smaller group from Lodge Haven, not because June asked them to, because they asked one another. Lodge Haven was repaired after the county engineer approved a new roof plan and a modern backup heating system. Yet it never returned to its old form. Celeste Pruitt stood in the renovated dining room one spring morning, watching workers remove the last temporary brace from the east wall. She admitted that love, donated lumber, and stubbornness were not a sustainable care model. "We kept believing one more fundraiser would save us," she told Ruth Calder. Ruth studied the new generator specifications. "Fundraisers don't come with maintenance schedules." Celeste adjusted her red-framed glasses. "You make generosity sound badly organized." "It usually is." Rather than reopen Lodge Haven as an isolated residence, They turned part of the building into a seasonal support center. It would offer temporary shelter during storms, medical transportation, communication assistance, and space for visiting legal advocates. Ruth proposed linking it with the County Rescue Network. Naomi Vance added legal clinics. Celeste organized medication reviews. Tessa built a confidential check-in list for veterans living alone beyond reliable cellular coverage. Jonah coordinated winter transport volunteers and required every one of them to complete actual rescue training, regardless of how impressive their military biographies sounded. Elias suspected that final rule had been written specifically for him. They named the program the Bitterroot Winter Line. At the first planning meeting, 12 people argued for nearly an hour over the wording of its guiding principles. Ruth wanted them brief. Naomi wanted them legally precise. Celeste wanted them humane. Ezra listened through the entire debate. Then he activated his speech device. Its mechanical voice filled the room. "Ask us in a way we can answer." Everyone stopped. The sentence became the first rule of the Winter Line. No one would be moved, transferred, or spoken for before being asked through a method they could use. The other rules came more easily after that. The red backpack returned to Elias's cabin before it joined the program. June sat at his kitchen table one afternoon, repairing its damaged zipper. She wore a blue denim shirt beneath a dark red cardigan, and her silver-threaded braid rested over one shoulder. The coffee maker coughed behind her. June glanced toward it. "You still have that thing?" "It knows too much. It barely knows how to heat water. That is how it avoids suspicion." They spoke lightly because the alternative was still difficult. Some days, Elias could sit across from June and remember why he had loved her. On other days, a small detail, the way she knew where he kept the sugar, the way she reached for a mug she had used 17 years before, made anger rise without warning. June never told him he should be past it. She did not say the investigation had justified her silence. When Elias became quiet, she did not fill the room with explanations. She waited until he chose whether to speak. The red backpack took 2 hours to repair. June replaced the zipper, reinforced the old white stitching, and attached a waterproof tag to the inner pocket. She filled it with a compact radio, emergency medication supplies, a laminated communication board, legal rights cards, spare batteries, and a notebook with thick pages suitable for unsteady hands. Elias watched her close it. "You could hang it by the door," she said. "No." June looked at him carefully. He touched the repaired strap. Things hanging on walls become memorials. What should it become? Useful. The backpack became the first field kit of the Bitterroot Winter Line. Corbin Shaw survived his cardiac episode and spent nearly 2 months in a rehabilitation center outside Missoula. He completed his testimony through several short sessions because the doctors refused to let him turn recovery into another endurance contest. Elias visited in early April. Corbin was seated beside a window in a gray cardigan, his metal-framed glasses low on his nose. A portable heart monitor rested on the table beside a stack of case files he had been forbidden to read. Elias placed a paper cup in front of him. Corbin inspected it. "Coffee?" "Technically. From your machine?" "It has recently become cooperative." "That sounds suspicious." "I threatened to replace it." Corbin took one careful sip, paused, and looked towards the ceiling. "The machine may have been trying to protect humanity." Elias sat opposite him. Neither man said the past was forgiven. Corbin did not ask whether Elias understood why he had remained silent. Elias did not offer absolution because illness had made Corbin look older. They talked about the investigation, the Winter Line, and Jonah's unreasonable devotion to written safety procedures. Before Elias left, Corbin said, "I would change it if I could." Elias stood with one hand on the chair. "I know." It was not forgiveness, but it was no longer a closed door. June rented a small house near Hamilton rather than moving into Elias's cabin. It had yellow curtains, a leaking porch gutter, and enough space for a desk covered in case notes. She and Elias saw each other at Winterline meetings, radio checks, and community dinners. Sometimes they spoke with the ease of old partners who remembered one another's habits. Sometimes an ordinary question exposed the years between them. When June asked why Elias had never replaced his watch, he left dinner early. When Elias forgot that June no longer took sugar in her coffee, she sat in her truck afterward and cried where no one could see. They did not call the pain proof that love had failed. They stopped calling love proof that pain should disappear. Morrow became the Winterline's unofficial inspector of people, blankets, and unattended food. The old German shepherd attended meetings in a navy strip added to his worn leather collar. He usually slept beneath the conference table, one ear angled toward every paper bag brought into the room. His hips grew stiffer as the weather warmed. Elias placed a padded ramp beside the truck and limited the distance Morrow walked during radio checks. No one treated the dog's aging as a tragedy. Morrow still chose where to lie, whom to watch, and when to ignore Elias in favor of a more promising source of sausage. At the first Winterline gathering after the snow began to melt, Ezra sat beside Morrow near the front of the renovated Lodge Haven dining room. Volunteers, residents, rescue workers, lawyers, and county staff filled the tables. The atmosphere was informal enough that Ruth had been forced to accept a paper plate, and formal enough that Jonah had hidden the extension cords from anyone without training. Ezra activated his speech device. The room quieted. "I have been thanked," the device said, "for being brave." He paused to select the next sentence. "I was not brave. I was angry." A few people smiled. "I do not thank Elias for saving me." Elias, standing near the back, folded his arms. Ezra looked directly at him. "I thank all of you for waiting long enough for me to save my own voice." Morrow lifted his head at the sound of the mechanical speech, then lowered it again. The room did not erupt in applause immediately. They waited until Ezra tapped once against the table. Only then did they stand. After the gathering, Elias went outside onto the porch. Sunlight rested across Bitterroot Valley. Snow slid from the roofs in slow drops, striking the railing with the steady rhythm of a clock beginning again. The mountains remained white, but dark lines of earth had appeared along the lower slopes. June stepped outside and stood beside him. Inside, Ezra knocked 3 times on the table to summon Morrow. The dog ignored him. Someone near the kitchen had opened a package of sliced ham. Ezra's speech device announced, "Traitor!" Laughter moved through the room. June watched Elias smile. "Do you think we can start over?" she asked. The question had waited between them for months. Elias looked towards the valley. "No." June lowered her eyes. He let the answer remain honest before continuing. "We can't start over. Starting over would mean none of it happened." June nodded once. "We can start from here." He did not take her hand. She did not lean against him. They stood side by side while winter withdrew from the valley, neither of them asking the season to return what it had taken. Behind them, a volunteer named Marcus Hale carried the red backpack toward a Winterline vehicle. Marcus was a 39-year-old Army veteran who now repaired heating systems and had joined the program after realizing how many isolated homes depended on equipment older than their owners. The backpack no longer looked like an artifact. Its canvas had been cleaned, its zipper replaced, and a small Winterline tag had been sewn beside Elias's uneven white stitches. Marcus placed it in the vehicle beside a portable radio and a box of thermal blankets. He was heading to check on a former mechanic living alone beyond the southern ridge. The bag had once been buried beneath snow to lead Elias towards someone who had disappeared. Now it left the building every morning for the opposite reason, to make certain no one else disappeared in silence. Some winters do not give back what they took. But healing does not always mean recovering the past. Sometimes it means learning to listen, choosing not to leave anyone unseen, and finding the courage to begin from where we are. Perhaps God's grace appears in small things: a patient heart, an old dog who refuses to walk away, or one person willing to wait until another can finally speak. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what starting from here means in your own life. Please subscribe if you would like to hear more stories of loyalty, loss, and quiet hope. May peace find you wherever you are tonight.